Marta's life seemed ordinary, filled with the usual highs and lows of a working mother. But one evening, her world was turned upside down when her son, Lucas, revealed a terrifying secret about his stepfather, Ernesto. Overwhelmed with disbelief and fear, Marta decided to uncover the truth herself. She pretended to leave but hid in Lucas's room instead, hoping it was all just a misunderstanding. What she witnessed was far worse than she could have imagined, pushing her to take desperate actions to protect her son. This heartbreaking journey from discovery to confrontation and ultimately to a painful but hopeful new beginning shows the lengths a mother will go to keep her child safe. If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. Before we dive into this story, please let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Marta felt an overwhelming sense of exhaustion as she finally closed the door behind her, signaling the end of yet another grueling day at work. The weight of the day seemed to lift slightly as she slipped off her shoes, letting her bare feet touch the cool, comforting surface of the floor. She wandered down the hallway, the quiet of the house wrapping around her like a familiar blanket. "Lucas, where are you, my love?" she called out softly, expecting to hear the usual excited footsteps of her son rushing to greet her. But there was only silence. A flicker of unease rippled through her as she made her way to the kitchen. There, on the table, lay a small piece of paper, hastily scrawled in the unmistakable handwriting of her 8-year-old son. "Mom, I'm in my room. I don't want dinner. Lucas." Her heart began to race, each beat echoing in her ears like a drum. Something was off. Lucas never skipped dinner. Without thinking, Marta bounded up the stairs, taking them two at a time, a growing sense of dread tightening its grip on her heart. She paused briefly outside his door, her hand trembling as she knocked gently. "Lucas, sweetheart, may I come in?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. But the only response was the heavy, oppressive silence that seemed to fill the space between them. "I'm coming in, okay?" she whispered, pushing the door open just a crack, allowing a sliver of light from the hallway to pierce the darkness of the room. "Lucas," her voice was barely audible, as if she were afraid of shattering the fragile stillness. Then she heard a soft, muffled sob coming from the corner of the room. Her heart clenched painfully as she reached for the light switch, flooding the room with brightness. There, huddled in the small space between the bed and the wall, was Lucas, his tiny body trembling with each sob. "Oh, my precious boy," Marta breathed, rushing to his side. She knelt beside him, her heart breaking at the sight of his tear-streaked face. "What happened, darling? Why are you crying?" Lucas looked up at her, his eyes swollen and red from crying. "I don't want to talk about it," he mumbled, his voice choked with fear. Marta felt a deep, gnawing pain in her chest, a mother's instinct telling her that something was wrong. "You can tell me anything, Lucas. Whatever it is, we'll get through it together," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. But Lucas shook his head violently, his fear palpable. "No, I can't. He'll kill me if I do." The words hit Marta like a physical blow. She felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her, leaving her off balance, teetering on the edge of a terrifying abyss. "Who, Lucas? Who would do that to you?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, her mind racing with possibilities she didn't want to consider. But Lucas only buried his face deeper between his knees, as if trying to hide from a reality too awful to face. "No one. Just forget it," he muttered, his voice muffled. "Lucas, please, look at me," Marta begged, gently lifting his tear-streaked face to meet hers. "No one will hurt you. I'm your mom, and I'll protect you no matter what. Please, tell me what's happening." Lucas hesitated, his eyes wide with a fear that seemed far too deep for a child. It's Ernesto," he finally whispered, his voice trembling. Marta's breath caught in her throat, her entire body going numb. "Ernesto? Your stepfather? What do you mean?" she asked, dread creeping into her voice. Lucas looked away, unable to meet her eyes. He hurts me when you're not here." Marta felt as though the world had stopped. Her mind refused to process the words, as if by denying them she could make them untrue. "No, that can't be. Ernesto loves you. There must be some mistake," she said, her voice faltering. But Lucas pulled away from her, his face contorted with anger and pain. "It's not a mistake. You never believe me. That's why I didn't want to tell you anything," he shouted, his voice breaking with emotion. "Lucas, please," Marta cried, reaching out for him, but he had already retreated to the safety of his bed, pulling the covers over his head and shutting her out completely. Marta remained kneeling on the floor, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and disbelief. Could it be true? Could the man she trusted, the man who had shown her nothing but love and kindness, be capable of such a thing? Her thoughts spiraled out of control as she stood up shakily, leaving the room and closing the door softly behind her. She needed to think, to breathe, to make sense of the madness that had just invaded her life. Downstairs, she poured herself a glass of water, her hands trembling so violently that she almost dropped it. How could this be happening? How could she have been so blind? The sound of the front door opening snapped her out of her thoughts. "Honey, I'm home," Ernesto's cheerful voice echoed through the hallway, a cruel contrast to the darkness that had just consumed her world. Marta inhaled deeply, her mind racing as she tried to steady her trembling hands. She couldn't afford to let any suspicion flicker across her face, not now, not until she knew for sure. When Ernesto walked into the kitchen, his usual warm smile greeted her. "How was your day, love?" he asked, moving closer to kiss her. But before she realized it, Marta recoiled, her body reacting instinctively. Ernesto's smile faded, concern replacing the warmth in his eyes. "Is something wrong?" Marta forced herself to shake her head, a tight, unnatural smile forming on her lips. "No, I'm fine. Just tired. It's been a long day," she lied, her voice barely above a whisper. Ernesto's brow furrowed with concern. "Do you want me to order dinner so you don't have to worry about it?" he offered, his voice full of care. But Marta couldn't bear the thought of sitting at the same table with him, not after what Lucas had told her. "No, thank you. I'm not hungry," she replied, avoiding his gaze, her hands fidgeting nervously. "I think I'll go to bed early tonight." "Are you sure everything's okay?" Ernesto asked, reaching out to touch her shoulder, but she took a step back, evading his touch. Yes, I just need some rest," Marta mumbled, her heart pounding in her chest as she turned towards the door. "Good night." "Wait," Ernesto called after her, his voice filled with a hint of suspicion. "Where's Lucas? I brought him something special." Marta's breath caught in her throat as she froze in the doorway, panic surging through her veins. He's sleeping. He wasn't feeling well," she stammered, her voice trembling with the effort to keep calm. "Oh, that's too bad. Should I go check on him?" Ernesto offered, taking a step towards the stairs. "No," the word escaped her lips before she could stop it, sharp and loud, hanging in the air between them. She turned to see Ernesto's puzzled expression, his eyes narrowing slightly. "I mean, no, just let him rest. You can see him tomorrow," she added hastily, trying to mask her anxiety with a forced smile. Before Ernesto could respond, Marta hurried up the stairs, her legs barely able to carry her as she reached her room. She slammed the door shut, locking it behind her as she collapsed onto the bed, her heart hammering in her chest. "What am I going to do?" she thought, despair washing over her. The days that followed were pure agony for Marta. Each time Ernesto interacted with Lucas, she watched them closely, her heart in her throat, searching for any signs of the horrors Lucas had hinted at. But on the surface, everything seemed normal. Ernesto was his usual self, kind, attentive, and patient even when Lucas had his occasional tantrums. But something had changed in Lucas. He was quieter and more withdrawn. He no longer rushed to greet Ernesto at the door when he came home, a habit he had once loved. One afternoon, as Marta prepared dinner, she knew she had to try talking to Lucas again. She couldn't let this continue, not if what Lucas had said was true. She found him in his room, sitting at his small desk, silently drawing. "Hey, sweetheart. Can I come in?" she asked softly, her heart aching at the sight of him. Lucas nodded, not looking up from his paper. Marta sat down on the bed, watching him for a moment. "What are you drawing?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "Nothing," Lucas muttered, quickly covering his drawing with his arm. Marta sighed, her heart heavy with the burden of what she needed to ask. "Lucas, we need to talk about what you told me the other day, about Ernesto," she said gently, trying to keep her voice steady. Lucas's pencil stopped mid-stroke, and he tensed up, refusing to meet her gaze. "I don't want to talk about it," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Marta felt a wave of helplessness wash over her, but she knew she had to press on. "I know it's hard, but I need to understand what happened, Lucas. You can tell me anything. I'm your mom, and I'll always protect you," she urged, her voice trembling with emotion. Tears welled up in Lucas's eyes as he shook his head, his small body trembling. "Please, Lucas, I need to know the truth. I can't help you if I don't know what's going on," Marta pleaded, her heart breaking at the sight of her son's distress. After a long silence, Lucas finally looked up at her, his eyes filled with a mix of fear and resignation. "Do you promise you won't get mad?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Marta's heart shattered at the question. "I promise, sweetheart. I could never be mad at you," she assured him, her voice thick with emotion. Lucas took a deep, shaky breath before he spoke again, his voice so soft she had to strain to hear him. "Sometimes, when you're not home, Ernesto comes to my room. He says he wants to play games with me, but his games scare me," he whispered, his voice trembling. Marta felt the blood drain from her face, her body going cold. "What kind of games, Lucas?" she asked, her voice barely audible, fearing the answer. "Touching games," Lucas murmured, his eyes fixed on the floor, too ashamed to look at her. "He says it's normal, that all dads play like that with their kids. But I know it's not true. It makes me feel bad." Marta had to clamp her hand over her mouth to keep from screaming. Her entire world seemed to tilt on its axis, the horror of her son's words crashing over her like a wave. She took several deep breaths, trying to hold herself together for Lucas's sake. "Why didn't you tell me sooner, sweetheart?" she asked, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. Lucas looked at her with tear-filled eyes, his expression a mix of guilt and fear. "Because Ernesto said that if I told you, you'd be sad and leave us. He said it would be my fault if our family broke up," he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. Marta's heart broke into a million pieces as she pulled her son into her arms, holding him tightly as tears streamed down her face. "None of this is your fault, Lucas, not one bit. You were so brave to tell me," she whispered fiercely, her voice thick with emotion. Lucas clung to her, his small body trembling with fear. "What are we going to do now, Mom?" he asked, his voice trembling. If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 1 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. Marta pulled back just enough to look into his eyes, her own filled with determination. "We're going to get through this, I promise. But I need you to be strong and trust me, okay?" she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil raging inside her. Lucas nodded, hugging her tightly. "Good," Marta said, forcing herself to stay calm. "Now, I want you to pack a bag with your clothes and your favorite toys. We're leaving." "Leaving? Where are we going?" Lucas asked, his voice tinged with confusion. "We're going to Grandma's house for a few days," Marta explained, trying to sound upbeat, even though fear and anger churned in her stomach. "And what about Ernesto?" Lucas asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Marta's heart skipped a beat, but she forced a calm smile. "Don't worry about him, sweetheart. Just focus on getting your things. I'll take care of everything else," she reassured him, though inside, she was already planning how to keep her son safe from the man who had shattered their world. Marta clenched her fists, her resolve hardening. "Don't worry about him, Lucas. I'll handle everything," she assured her son, her voice firm despite the turmoil brewing inside her. While Lucas packed his belongings, Marta retreated to her room, her heart racing as she dialed her mother's number. "Mom, it's Marta. I need your help. Lucas and I are coming over. I'll explain everything when we get there," she said, her voice shaking slightly as she tried to keep her emotions in check. After ending the call, she quickly dialed Anna, her closest friend. "Anna, it's me. I need a huge favor. Can you come pick us up? It's an emergency." Marta's voice cracked with the weight of the situation. Within 30 minutes, Marta and Lucas were safely inside Anna's car, heading towards her mother's house. The tension in the car was palpable. "Are you sure you don't want me to call the police?" Anna asked, her voice filled with concern as she glanced at Marta. Marta shook her head, her gaze fixed on the road ahead. "Not yet. I need concrete evidence. If I go to the police now, it'll be his word against Lucas's, and I can't put him through that kind of stress," she explained, her voice laced with determination. Anna hesitated before asking the question that had been on her mind since the call. "And what are you going to do?" Marta turned her head slightly, her face a mask of steely resolve. "I'm going to get that evidence, no matter what it takes," she declared, her voice steady and unwavering. The days spent at her mother's house brought a reprieve for Lucas. Slowly, he began to smile again, his laughter returning as he played in the garden. But each time Marta watched him, her heart ached with a bittersweet mixture of relief and guilt. How had she missed the signs? How could she not have known? Ernesto called incessantly, his voice laced with concern as he asked when they would return. Marta, her stomach churning with every lie, told him Lucas was still sick or that her mother needed help. The excuses piled up, but she knew she was buying time, precious time to figure out her next move. One afternoon, as Lucas played outside, Marta sat in the kitchen with her mother, her hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea that did little to ease her nerves. "Mom, I need to talk to you," Marta began, her voice trembling slightly. Her mother looked at her, concern etched across her face. "What's wrong, Marta? You've been acting so strange these past few days," she said softly, her eyes searching her daughter's face for answers. Marta took a deep breath. The words she had been dreading to say caught in her throat. But she couldn't hold back any longer. She told her mother everything, every horrifying detail of what Lucas had confessed. As she spoke, she watched her mother's expression shift from disbelief to horror, and finally to an anger so fierce it took Marta by surprise. "That bastard," her mother spat, her voice trembling with rage. "We need to report him right now." Marta shook her head, exhaustion heavy in her eyes. "It's not that simple, Mom. Without proof, it'll just be Lucas's word against Ernesto's. I can't risk putting Lucas through that kind of trauma." Her mother stared at her, disbelief mingling with fear. "So what are you going to do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marta's expression hardened as she looked at her mother with unwavering determination. "I'm going back home alone, and I'm going to get that evidence," she declared, her voice filled with a quiet but powerful resolve. Her mother's eyes widened in shock. "You're crazy. It's dangerous," she exclaimed, her voice laced with fear. "It's the only way," Marta insisted, her voice firm. "I need you to stay with Lucas. Tell him I had to go back to work for an emergency. I'll come back for him as soon as I can." Her mother's face softened with concern. "I don't like this at all, Marta, but I know I can't stop you. Just be careful, please," she pleaded, tears welling up in her eyes. Marta nodded, leaning in to hug her mother tightly, drawing strength from her embrace. "I will, Mom. I promise," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She then walked out to the garden where Lucas was playing. "Mom, do you have to go?" Lucas asked, his voice small and sad as he looked up at her. Marta knelt beside him, gently stroking his hair. "Just for a few days, sweetheart. I have to take care of something important at work, but I'll be back soon, I promise," she reassured him, forcing a smile. Lucas's eyes filled with tears as he asked the question that had been haunting him. "Do you have to go back with Ernesto?" Marta's heart broke at the sight of his fear. She hugged him tightly, her voice trembling with emotion. "No, my love. You'll never have to worry about him again, I swear." That night, Marta returned to the house she had once considered her home. As she walked through the door, Ernesto greeted her with a mix of relief and annoyance. "Finally, you're back. I was worried. Why weren't you answering my calls?" he asked, his tone sharp as he approached her. Marta forced a smile, her heart pounding in her chest. "I'm sorry. I was busy with my mother and Lucas. You know how it is when they're not feeling well," she replied, her voice as steady as she could manage. "And where is Lucas now?" Ernesto asked, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Still at my mother's. The doctor recommended he stay a few more days to recover," Marta lied, her stomach churning with each word. Ernesto frowned but nodded. "And you're staying here?" he asked, a hint of suspicion in his voice. "Yes, I have to go back to work, but I'll visit him in the afternoons," Marta said, trying to sound as nonchalant as possible. "All right," Ernesto replied, a smile spreading across his face as he stepped closer. "I missed you, you know," he said, leaning in to kiss her. Marta pulled away, her skin crawling at the thought of his touch. "I'm tired," she murmured, taking a step back. "I think I'll go to bed." Ernesto's expression darkened for a brief moment before he forced a smile. "Of course, rest well. Tomorrow's a new day," he said, his tone eerily calm. Marta spent the night lying awake, her mind racing with plans and fears. She knew she had to be careful and calculated. Part of her still struggled to believe that Ernesto, the man she had trusted with her life, was capable of such monstrous acts. But the other part of her, the mother who would do anything to protect her child, knew she had to act. The next morning, she rose early, preparing breakfast as if everything were normal, her every move carefully calculated, her mind set on what she had to do next. Ernesto entered the kitchen, yawning, as the morning sun streamed through the windows. "Good morning, sweetheart," he greeted, leaning in to kiss Marta. She forced herself to remain still, fighting the instinct to pull away. "Good morning," she replied, mustering a strained smile as she handed him a cup of coffee. Ernesto took a seat at the table, oblivious to the storm brewing inside Marta. "Have you spoken to Lucas? How is he doing?" he asked, taking a sip of his coffee. "Better," Marta lied, her voice steady, though her heart raced. "But the doctor thinks it's best if he stays with my mother for a few more days." Ernesto frowned, setting his cup down with a slight clink. "Don't you think they're being overly cautious?" "It's just a cold," he remarked, his tone casual but probing. Marta felt her muscles tense, her control slipping. "No," she snapped, more harshly than she intended. "The doctor knows what he's doing," she quickly softened her tone, trying to hide her anxiety. All right," Ernesto said, raising his hands in mock surrender, though his eyes narrowed slightly. "I'm just saying, I miss the kid. The house feels so empty without him." Marta bit back the scream that threatened to escape. How dare he? How dare he pretend to care? She took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay calm. "I miss him too," she said, her voice barely concealing the venom she felt. "But he'll be back soon." Ernesto nodded, seemingly satisfied with her response as he continued to sip his coffee. "By the way, I'll be home late tonight. I have an important meeting after work," he mentioned casually. Marta's heart leaped with a mix of relief and dread. "Oh," she said, keeping her voice even, "that's fine, don't worry." Once Ernesto left for work, Marta sprang into action. She searched the house meticulously, her heart pounding as she rummaged through drawers, closets, and every hidden corner she could think of. But no matter where she looked, there was nothing that could serve as the concrete evidence she so desperately needed. Frustration boiled inside her as she sat on the living room sofa, feeling the weight of her helplessness. What was she going to do? She needed something undeniable, something that would expose the monster Ernesto truly was. Suddenly, an idea flashed through her mind. It was risky, potentially dangerous, but it might just work. That afternoon, when Ernesto called to confirm that he would be late, Marta set her plan into motion. She picked up her phone and called Lucas. "Hi, sweetheart," she said when she heard his small voice on the other end of the line. "How are you?" "I'm okay, Mom," Lucas replied, his voice tinged with sadness. "When are you coming home?" "Soon, my love, very soon," Marta promised, her heart breaking at the longing in his voice. "But I need you to do something for me. It's really important." "What is it?" Lucas asked, his voice trembling slightly. Marta took a deep breath, bracing herself. "I need you to call Ernesto," she said gently. Silence filled the line, and Marta could almost hear Lucas's fear. "I don't want to," he finally whispered. "I know, sweetheart. I know it's hard, but this is very important. I need you to tell him that you're coming home tomorrow," Marta explained, trying to keep her voice calm and reassuring. But that's not true. "Is it?" Lucas asked, his voice quivering with fear. "No, my love, you're not coming back yet. But I need Ernesto to believe that you are. Can you do that for me?" Marta pleaded, her heart aching for her son's innocence, which had been so cruelly shattered. There was a long pause, during which Marta could only imagine the fear and confusion swirling in Lucas's mind. "Okay," Lucas finally said, his voice small and scared. "I'll do it." "Thank you, sweetheart. You're so brave. I promise everything will be okay," Marta assured him, though her fears loomed large in her mind. After hanging up, Marta steeled herself for what was to come. She knew the plan she was about to execute was fraught with danger, but it was the only way she could see to protect her son and bring the truth to light. That evening, when she heard Ernesto's car pull into the garage, Marta was already in position. She had hidden under Lucas's bed, her heart pounding so loudly in her chest that she feared Ernesto might hear it. If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 2 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. She listened as Ernesto's footsteps climbed the stairs, stopping outside Lucas's room. There was a moment of eerie silence before the door creaked open. Lucas, Ernesto called softly into the empty room. "Oh, right. You're coming back tomorrow." Marta's breath hitched as she watched his feet move closer, the bed creaking slightly as he sat down on the edge. "I've missed you, little one," Ernesto murmured in a sickeningly sweet tone. "Tomorrow we'll play our special game, eh? It'll be our secret, as always." Marta's stomach churned, bile rising in her throat. She wanted to leap out and confront him right then, but she knew she needed more. She needed to let him incriminate himself fully. Ernesto stood up and moved to Lucas's closet, pulling something out from the back. Marta strained to see what it was, but her position under the bed limited her view. "Our little treasure," Ernesto whispered, and Marta heard the faint sound of pages being turned. "So many memories here, our secret." That was the final straw. Marta couldn't contain herself any longer. She rolled out from under the bed, her anger and disgust giving her the strength she needed. "Drop that," she shouted, her voice filled with fury. Ernesto spun around, his face a mask of shock and horror. "Marta, what are you doing here?" "What am I doing here?" Marta's voice trembled with rage as she advanced toward him. What are you doing here in my son's room, talking about secrets and special games?" Her eyes blazed with a fury that made Ernesto take a step back, clutching the object now visible as a scrapbook tightly to his chest. No, it's not what you think. I can explain," Ernesto stammered, his voice rising in panic. "Explain," Marta's voice dripped with venom as she closed the distance between them. "Explain how you've been abusing my son. How you've been terrorizing him with your disgusting games." Ernesto's face twisted with a mix of fear and defiance. "You don't understand," he snarled, his tone turning defensive. "Lucas and I have a special relationship. He loves me." "He's a child," Marta screamed, her voice raw with emotion. "An innocent child that you've been hurting." Ernesto's expression hardened as he took a step forward, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "You have no proof of anything. It'll be your word against mine. Who do you think they'll believe, the hysterical mother or the respectable stepfather?" But Marta was ready. She smiled a cold, triumphant smile that sent a chill down Ernesto's spine. "Oh, I have proof," she said, her voice filled with a calm that only comes from absolute certainty. Slowly, she pulled her phone from her pocket, holding it up so he could see. "I've been recording everything since you entered this room, every sick, twisted word you've said." Ernesto's face went ashen as he realized the trap he had walked into. His grip on the scrapbook loosened, and it fell to the floor with a dull thud. "Marta, please. We can talk about this," he begged, his voice trembling with fear. "There's nothing to talk about," Marta replied coldly, her eyes never leaving his. "You're going to pay for what you did to my son." As Ernesto stumbled back, Marta felt a sense of justice surge within her. She knew the fight was far from over, but for the first time, she felt the power was in her hands. No more hiding, no more fear. She would protect Lucas with everything she had, and Ernesto would face the consequences of his actions. Ernesto's face crumbled, desperation overtaking him. "No, you can't do that," he pleaded, his voice shaking with fear. Marta stood firm, her eyes cold as steel. "I already did," she said with finality. "Now, you're going to give me whatever it is you're holding, and then you're going to leave my house forever." No, Ernesto suddenly bolted towards the door, panic driving him to flee. But Marta was quicker. Without thinking, she threw herself at him, grabbing him around the waist. They both tumbled to the floor, their bodies tangled in a violent struggle. "Let me go," Ernesto shouted, his voice rising in panic as he wrestled to free himself. "Give it to me," Marta demanded, her hands clawing at the object in his grasp. They struggled fiercely, the object slipping from Ernesto's grip and clattering to the floor between them. Marta's heart froze as she saw what it was: a photo album. It had fallen open, the pages revealing images that made her blood run cold. The horror of what she saw rooted her to the spot, her mind reeling with the realization of the depths of Ernesto's depravity. Seizing the moment, Ernesto wrenched himself free and dashed the door. But Marta, driven by a surge of fury and desperation, grabbed the nearest object, a heavy lamp from the bedside table, and hurled it at him with all her might. The lamp struck Ernesto in the head with a sickening thud, causing him to stumble. He lost his balance, tumbling down the stairs with a muffled cry. Marta stood paralyzed, her breath caught in her throat as she listened to the eerie silence that followed. With trembling legs, she forced herself to descend the stairs. Ernesto lay at the bottom, motionless, his body twisted unnaturally. Her breath hitched as she realized the gravity of what had just happened. Hands shaking uncontrollably, Marta pulled out her phone, her fingers numb as she dialed a number she had never thought she'd need. "Emergency services, what's your situation?" The operator's voice crackled through the line, cutting through the fog in her mind. Marta stared at Ernesto's still form, then at the photo album lying open on the floor upstairs, its contents searing into her memory. "I need help," she whispered, her voice trembling. I think I just killed someone. The sound of sirens soon broke the suffocating silence of the night, their wails growing louder as they approached. Marta sat on the last step of the staircase, her eyes fixed on Ernesto's unmoving body. Her hands trembled so violently that she nearly dropped the phone. The operator's voice, though distant, kept her anchored to the reality of the situation. "Ma, are you still there?" "Yes," Marta whispered, barely aware of her voice. "The police and ambulance are on their way. Please stay where you are and don't touch anything. Can you do that?" "Yes," Marta repeated mechanically, the words barely registering. She couldn't tear her eyes away from Ernesto, her mind numb as she tried to process what had just happened. Was he truly dead or merely unconscious? Part of her wanted to approach him, to check for signs of life, but another part of her, the part still clinging to reason, told her to stay where she was. The minutes stretched into eternity as she waited, the flashing red and blue lights finally illuminating the room in stark, unforgiving colors. The reality of what she had done weighed heavily on her, each second passing like a lifetime. As the police and paramedics arrived, their rushed movements filled the house with a flurry of activity. Marta remained seated on the step, her mind still in a daze, barely registering their presence. She watched as they attended to Ernesto, their hushed voices and professional demeanor a stark contrast to the chaos inside her. Hours later, after the immediate shock had worn off, Marta found herself back at her mother's house, sitting in the quiet kitchen. Her mother's comforting presence beside her was the only thing keeping her from collapsing under the weight of it all. They had already spoken to the police, and Marta had given her statement, but the words still felt foreign on her tongue. Marta's mother ran a hand over her face, her voice heavy with emotion. How could he do something like that to a child? To our Lucas, her voice broke, and Marta felt tears welling up in her eyes again. "I don't know, Mom." "I don't know," Marta replied, her voice thick with grief. The enormity of what had happened, of what they would have to face, was overwhelming. They sat in silence for a moment, each lost in their thoughts. "What are we going to do now?" her mother finally asked, her voice trembling. Marta sighed deeply, feeling the weight of the future pressing down on her. "I suppose we'll have to talk to Lucas, explain what happened." And then she paused, the words catching in her throat. "Then there will be lawyers, trials. God, how are we going to get through this?" Her mother reached out and took her hand, squeezing it gently. "One day at a time, my dear. We'll take it one day at a time. And you won't be alone. I'll be with you every step of the way." Marta squeezed her mother's hand back, grateful for the strength she provided. But the sound of small footsteps interrupted their moment. They both turned towards the hallway as Lucas's sleepy voice called out, "Mommy." Marta's heart clenched as she quickly stood up. "I'm here, sweetheart," she called back, her voice softening. Lucas appeared in the doorway, rubbing his eyes, still half asleep. When he saw Marta, he ran to her, throwing himself into her arms. "Mommy," he cried, holding her tightly. Marta hugged him close, tears spilling down her cheeks once more as she kissed his hair. "Oh, my love," she murmured, "my brave, precious boy." Lucas looked up at her, his young face etched with confusion. "Why are you crying, Mommy? Did something bad happen?" Marta exchanged a glance with her mother, who gave her a slight nod. It was time to tell Lucas the truth. She knelt so that she was at eye level with him, gently brushing the hair from his forehead. "Lucas, honey," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "we need to talk about something very important." Lucas's brown eyes widened, a shadow of fear crossing his innocent face. "Is it about Ernesto?" he asked, his voice small and scared. Marta's heart ached with the pain of what she had to say, but she knew there was no avoiding it. "Yes, my love. It's about Ernesto," she confirmed, her voice soft yet steady. Her mother approached, placing a comforting hand on Marta's shoulder. "Do you want me to leave you two alone?" she offered gently. Marta shook her head, grateful for her mother's support. "No, Mom, please stay," she said, her voice filled with quiet strength. She needed her mother by her side for this. Lucas needed them both. As she looked into her son's eyes, Marta took a deep breath and began to explain, her voice calm and loving, even as the tears continued to fall. The truth was painful, but it was necessary. Together they would face whatever came next, one day at a time. They sat together on the living room couch, with Lucas nestled between Marta and his grandmother. The tension in the room was palpable, but Marta knew this conversation was necessary. She gently took her son's small hands in hers, her heart aching with the weight of the words she was about to speak. "Lucas, do you remember what you told me about Ernesto? About the games he played with you?" she asked softly. Lucas lowered his gaze, his small body tensing as he nodded slightly. "Yeah," he whispered. Marta squeezed his hands gently, willing him to feel her love and support. "Sweetheart, I want you to know that you were very, very brave to tell me. You did the right thing," she reassured him, her voice thick with emotion. Lucas looked up at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear. "So you believe me?" he asked in a voice so small it nearly broke her heart. Marta felt tears sting her eyes as she nodded, her voice trembling. "Of course I believe you, my love. I will always believe you. And I'm so sorry I didn't realize it sooner. I'm so sorry I wasn't able to protect you from him." Lucas looked at her, his brow furrowing in confusion and concern. "What happened, Mommy? Why are you here so late?" he asked, the innocence in his voice a stark contrast to the darkness they had faced. Marta took a deep breath, trying to find the right words to explain the situation without frightening him further. "You see, sweetheart, tonight I confronted Ernesto. I told him I knew what he had been doing to you," she began, watching as Lucas's eyes widened in fear. "Did he get mad? Did he hurt you?" Lucas's voice quivered with concern, his fear palpable. Marta shook her head, pulling him close. "No, my love, he didn't hurt me." But she hesitated, searching for the gentlest way to explain. "There was an accident. Ernesto fell and got hurt. He's in the hospital now." Lucas's eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and something that looked like hope. "Is he going to die?" he asked, his voice trembling. Marta's heart ached at the question, and she hugged him tightly. "No, sweetheart, he's not going to die. But he won't be coming home with us, ever again." Lucas was silent for a moment, processing this information. Then, to Marta's surprise, he started to cry, his small body trembling with the release of pent-up emotions. "Oh, my boy," Marta whispered, holding him as close as she could. "It's okay now. You're safe." Lucas's words were muffled by his sobs. "It's just that. I wanted him to die. Does that make me a bad person?" Marta exchanged a look of deep pain with her mother over Lucas's head, her own heart breaking at the weight her son had been carrying. She stroked his hair gently, her voice tender but firm. "No, my love, that doesn't make you a bad person. It's normal to feel that way after what he did to you. But the important thing is that he's far away now and can't hurt you anymore." His grandmother joined the hug, wrapping her arms around both of them. "And you have your mommy and grandma, who love you very much and will always protect you," she added, her voice soothing. They stayed like that for a while, the three of them wrapped in each other's arms, until Lucas's sobs finally began to subside and he calmed down. After a few moments of silence, Lucas pulled back slightly and looked up at his mother. "What's going to happen now?" he asked, his voice small and hesitant. Marta gently wiped away his tears and looked into his eyes, trying to infuse her voice with as much reassurance as possible. "Well, sweetheart, a few things are going to happen. First, we're going to stay here with Grandma for a while. Then we might have to talk to some people about what happened." If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 3 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. Lucas's eyes widened with fear. "With the police?" he asked, his voice shaking. Marta nodded slowly, trying to remain calm for his sake. "Yes, it's possible. But don't worry, I'll be with you the whole time. And these people only want to help us." Lucas looked down, picking at a loose thread on the couch. "And school, my friends." Marta smiled softly, trying to ease his worries. "For now, we'll take a few days off from school. We'll see what we do after that, okay?" Lucas nodded, though his expression remained serious. He yawned, the emotional exhaustion catching up with him. His grandmother took the cue. "I think it's time to go back to bed," she suggested gently. Lucas looked up at his mother, his eyes pleading. "Can I sleep with you, Mommy?" Marta smiled, her heart full of love for her brave little boy. "Of course, my love. Let's go." As they climbed the stairs, Marta's phone buzzed with a message. It was from Detective Lopez. "Mrs. Valdez, we need you to come to the station tomorrow. Bring your son. A child psychologist will be present to talk to him. Call me if you have any questions." Marta felt a pang of anxiety as she read the message. Tomorrow was going to be another difficult day, but she knew it was a necessary step to ensure Lucas's safety and begin the healing process. The next morning, Marta woke up early, before Lucas stirred. She watched him sleep, his little face peaceful, a stark contrast to the turmoil they had been through. She sighed, the weight of what was ahead pressing down on her. How was she going to protect him from everything that was coming? She quietly slipped out of bed and went downstairs to the kitchen, where her mother was already preparing breakfast. "Good morning, honey," her mother greeted her, handing her a cup of coffee. "How are you feeling?" Marta sighed deeply, taking the cup with a grateful nod. "Like I've been hit by a truck physically and emotionally." Her mother nodded, understanding all too well. "That's to be expected. You've been through so much, and the hardest part is still ahead." Marta pulled out her phone and showed her mother the message from Detective Lopez. "How am I going to explain to Lucas that he has to talk to the police?" Her mother placed a comforting hand on Marta's arm. "With the truth, honey. He's proven to be stronger than we ever imagined. Trust him." At that moment, they heard the soft sound of footsteps on the stairs. Lucas entered the kitchen, still in his pajamas, looking sleepily around the room. "Good morning, my love," Marta said, pulling him into a warm hug. "Are you hungry?" Lucas nodded, rubbing his eyes as he climbed into a chair at the table. They ate breakfast quietly, the normalcy of the moment a brief respite from the storm that lay ahead. As they finished, Marta knew it was time to broach the subject. "Lucas, sweetheart," she began gently, "today we have to go to a special place." Lucas looked up, his expression curious. "Where?" Marta took a deep breath. "To the police station," she said softly. "There are some people who want to talk to us about what happened with Ernesto." Lucas's spoon slipped from his hand, splashing milk onto the table. His eyes widened in fear. "I don't want to go," he whispered, his voice trembling. Marta reached out and took his hand, squeezing it reassuringly. "I know, sweetheart, but it's important, and I'll be with you the whole time. I promise." Lucas's voice quivered with anxiety. "Are they going to ask me questions?" Marta nodded gently. "Yes, probably. But there will also be a special doctor there, someone who talks to children who have been through tough things." Lucas frowned slightly. A shrink. Despite the seriousness of the situation, Marta couldn't help but smile at his choice of words. "No, my love, a psychologist, someone who will help you understand your feelings." Lucas seemed to think about this for a moment, his young mind processing the information. "Will you talk to him too, if I want you to?" he asked, his voice hopeful. Marta nodded, her heart swelling with pride at his bravery. "Yes, of course." After a moment, Lucas nodded, though his reluctance was clear. "Okay, I'll go, but I don't like it." Marta leaned in and kissed his forehead. "I know, sweetheart, and I'm so proud of you for being so brave." An hour later, they were in the car, driving to the police station. Lucas sat quietly, staring out the window, lost in his thoughts. Marta wanted to comfort him, to ease his fears, but she couldn't find the right words. The weight of what was happening pressed down on her, making it hard to breathe. When they arrived at the station, Detective Lopez was waiting for them at the entrance. "Good morning, Mrs. Vald," she greeted, then knelt to Lucas's level, her voice gentle. "And you must be Lucas. Nice to meet you." Lucas clung to Marta's leg, his fear evident. "He's a little nervous," Marta explained, her voice laced with concern. The detective smiled warmly, understanding his trepidation. "That's perfectly normal. Come on, I'll take you to Dr. Ruiz." They were led down a hallway to an office painted in bright, cheerful colors, with toys scattered everywhere. A middle-aged woman with a kind smile stood to greet them. "Hello, I'm Dr. Ruiz. You must be Lucas," she said warmly. Lucas nodded shyly, still holding onto his mother's hand. "Would you like to play with me for a while your mommy talks to Detective Lopez?" Dr. Ruiz asked gently, gesturing to the toys. Lucas looked up at Marta, seeking her approval. She nodded encouragingly. "It's okay, sweetheart. I'll be right outside if you need me." Reluctantly, Lucas let go of her hand and followed Dr. Ruiz into the room. Marta watched him go, her heart heavy with worry. Detective Lopez led Marta into an adjoining room with a one-way mirror, allowing her to see Lucas sitting on the floor with Dr. Ruiz, who had begun to play with some building blocks. The sight of her son in such a vulnerable state made Marta's resolve harden. She knew she had to do whatever it took to protect him. "Mrs. Vald," as the detective began, her tone serious but compassionate, "I know this is difficult, but we need your formal statement and Lucas's to proceed with the case against Mr. Morales." Marta nodded, her voice steady. "I understand. What do you need to know?" For the next hour, Marta recounted everything that had happened, going into detail about the events leading up to the confrontation with Ernesto. The detective took careful notes, occasionally asking questions to clarify certain points. Marta answered as best as she could, though reliving the trauma left her feeling emotionally drained. Finally, the detective looked up from her notes. "One more thing," she said, her voice taking on a more cautious tone. "Mr. Morales has been discharged from the hospital. He's now in police custody, and his lawyer has already filed a bail request." Marta felt a cold wave of fear wash over her. "Bail? That means he could get out?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The detective nodded, her expression serious. "It's unlikely, given the severity of the charges and the evidence we have, but I wanted you to be prepared just in case. The judge will probably deny the request, but we can't be certain until the hearing." Marta's mind raced, the thought of Ernesto being free again making her feel physically ill. "Thank you for letting me know," she said, her voice strained. At that moment, the door opened and Dr. Ruiz entered the room. Marta immediately stood up, her concern evident. "How's Lucas?" she asked, her voice filled with anxiety. Dr. Ruiz offered a gentle smile. "He's a very brave boy. We talked about what happened, though he mostly used play to express himself. There's trauma, but with the right support, I think he'll be able to overcome it." "What kind of support?" Marta asked, eager to do whatever it took to help her son heal. "I would recommend regular therapy, at least once a week," Dr. Ruiz replied. "It would also be beneficial for you to participate in some sessions as well, to help Lucas feel supported and understood." Marta nodded, her mind already racing with plans. "Whatever it takes. I'll do anything to help him." Also, Dr. Ruiz continued, It's important to keep his routine as normal as possible: school, activities, friends. Maintaining a sense of normalcy will help Lucas feel like he has some control over his life. I understand, Marta said, her voice determined. Can I see him now? Of course, Dr. Ruiz replied, gesturing towards the door. Marta entered the brightly colored room, her heart softening as she saw Lucas playing quietly with the building blocks. When he looked up and saw her, he immediately dropped the blocks and ran to her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Mommy, are we going home now?" Lucas asked, his voice small and tired. Marta hugged him tightly, her heart swelling with love and determination. "Yes, sweetheart, we're going home," she whispered. "And everything is going to be okay. I promise." Marta entered the office where Lucas was putting the finishing touches on a tower of blocks. "Hi, my love. How are you?" she asked gently. Lucas looked up at her, his eyes tired but calmer than before. "I'm okay, Mommy." "Dr. Ruiz is nice," he replied with a small smile. Marta felt a lump form in her throat as she smiled back. "I'm glad, sweetheart. Are you ready to go home?" Lucas nodded, but then glanced back at his tower of blocks with a hint of sadness. Dr. Ruiz, who had entered behind Marta, noticed his hesitation. "You know what, Lucas? You can come back anytime and keep building your tower. It'll be waiting for you," she said warmly. "Really?" Lucas asked, his face lighting up slightly. "Really," Dr. Ruiz confirmed with a reassuring smile. As they left the station, Marta felt a swirling mix of relief and anxiety. They had taken the first step on what she knew would be a long, challenging journey, but at least they were no longer facing it alone. "Where are we going now, Mommy?" Lucas asked as they walked to the car. Marta looked down at him, seeing a glimmer of the childhood innocence that Ernesto had tried to steal from him. At that moment, she made a decision. "You know what, my love? We're going to get ice cream, and then if you want, we can go to the park." If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 4 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. Lucas's face lit up with a bright smile. "Really?" "Really," Marta said, squeezing his hand gently. "It's a beautiful day, and we're together, that's what matters." They walked hand in hand to the nearby ice cream shop, the sun shining warmly on their faces. Marta knew the road ahead would be difficult, filled with trials, therapy, nights of nightmares, and days of doubt. But as she listened to Lucas animatedly discuss which ice cream flavors he might choose, she felt a sense of hope that they could overcome it all one day at a time, one step at a time. The chime of the ice cream shop door rang as they entered. The shop was nearly empty, except for an elderly couple sharing a sundae in one corner and a group of teenagers laughing in another. "What flavor do you want, sweetheart?" Marta asked, guiding Lucas to the counter. Lucas pressed his nose against the glass, his eyes scanning the colorful array of ice cream containers. "I want chocolate and strawberry." "Are you sure?" "Last time you said strawberry was for babies," Marta teased, raising an eyebrow. Lucas frowned thoughtfully, then smiled shyly. "Well, maybe I'm still a little bit of a baby." Marta felt her heartache at his words. In moments like these, Lucas seemed so small, so vulnerable. "2 scoops, please," she told the ice cream vendor, 1 chocolate and 1 strawberry. While they waited for their order, Marta noticed Lucas glancing around nervously. "Is something wrong, my love?" she asked softly. Lucas leaned closer and whispered, "What if Ernesto is here?" Marta knelt to be at his level, her voice calm and reassuring. "Sweetheart, Ernesto can't hurt us now. He's in a place where he can't get out." "Like a cage?" Lucas asked, his voice a mix of curiosity and lingering fear. Marta couldn't help but smile at his analogy. "Something like that." It's a place for people who have done bad things. A jail, Lucas asked, his eyes widening with understanding. Yes, like a jail. But don't worry about that now, okay? We're safe here, Marta reassured him, though she could see that he wasn't entirely convinced. With their ice creams in hand, they sat at a small table by the window. For a while they ate in silence, watching people pass by on the sidewalk outside. The normalcy of the moment was both comforting and surreal, a brief respite from the storm they had been weathering. Mommy, Lucas said suddenly, breaking the silence. Can I ask you something? Of course, my love. Anything, Marta replied, setting down her ice cream to give him her full attention. Lucas stirred his ice cream, avoiding her gaze. Why did Ernesto do those things to me? Did I do something bad? Marta felt as though she had been punched in the stomach. The pain in her son's voice was almost unbearable. She reached out and took his hands in hers, looking him directly in the eyes. Listen to me, Lucas. Nothing that happened was your fault. Absolutely nothing. Ernesto is a sick person who did very bad things. You didn't do anything to deserve that. But sometimes it felt good. Does that make me bad? Lucas's voice trembled, and tears welled up in his eyes. Marta had to summon every ounce of strength she had to keep her composure. No, my love, that doesn't make you bad. Your body reacted naturally, but that doesn't mean what Ernesto did was right. He abused your trust and your innocence. Lucas sniffled, his small body shaking with the weight of his emotions. And what if I become someone like him when I grow up? Oh, sweetheart, Marta whispered, moving around the table to wrap her arms around him. That won't happen. You are a wonderful person with a huge heart. What happened to you doesn't define who you are or who you will become. They stayed like that for a long moment, holding each other tightly, as if trying to squeeze out all the fear and pain. The world outside the ice cream shop faded away, leaving just the two of them in their little bubble. You know what, Marta said finally, pulling back just enough to look Lucas in the eyes. I think we should go see someone who can help us understand all of this better. Dr. Ruiz, Lucas asked, his voice still shaky but a little stronger. Marta nodded. Yes, or someone like her. Someone we can talk to about our feelings and who can help us feel better. What do you think? Lucas thought for a moment, his brow furrowed in concentration. Will you go too? Of course. We can go together if you want, Marta promised. Okay, Lucas said, a hint of a smile returning to his face. But only if we go to the park afterward like you promised. Marta smiled, feeling a small sense of relief. Of course, my love. A deal is a deal. After finishing their ice creams, they walked to the nearby park. The place was buzzing with families enjoying the warm weather and children's laughter filling the air. For a moment, Marta felt overwhelmed by the normalcy of it all. How could the world keep spinning when hers had been turned upside down? Look, Lucas exclaimed, pointing excitedly at the playground. There are swings free. Before Marta could respond, Lucas was already running toward the swings, his earlier worries momentarily forgotten. She followed him, her heart lifting at the sight of his joy. Push me, Mommy, Lucas called, his eyes sparkling with excitement as he climbed onto a swing. Marta obliged, gently pushing him as he laughed and shouted with glee. For a little while, it was as if nothing bad had ever happened, as if they were just a normal mother and son enjoying a beautiful day at the park. But reality has a way of creeping back in. As Marta watched Lucas swinging higher and higher, her phone vibrated in her pocket. She pulled it out and saw a message from Detective Lopez, Mrs. Valdez. The judge has denied bail for Ernesto Morales. He will remain in custody until the trial. Call me when you can to discuss the next steps. Marta felt a wave of relief wash over her, but it was tinged with anxiety. Ernesto wouldn't be able to get near them, but the message also meant that the legal process was moving forward, bringing with it all the painful memories they would have to confront. She put her phone away and focused on Lucas, his laughter filling the air as he soared on the swing. In that moment, she made a silent promise to herself and him. No matter what the future held, she would be there for him, every step of the way. Together, they would face whatever challenges came, and together, they would heal. "Mommy, look how high," Lucas shouted, his voice filled with joy as he soared on the swing, pulling Marta out of her swirling thoughts. "I see you, my love," she replied, forcing a smile despite the weight of the day's events pressing down on her. "But not too high, okay? I don't want you to fall." Lucas beamed at her and slowed down just a bit, his laughter ringing through the park. After a while on the swings, he decided he wanted to go to the slide. Marta followed, her eyes never leaving him as he climbed and slid down, his excitement evident with each turn. She found a bench nearby where she could sit and keep a close watch on him, allowing herself a moment to breathe. "Excuse me," a voice beside her said. Marta turned to see a middle-aged woman with a warm smile standing next to the bench. "Is that your son?" the woman asked, nodding towards Lucas. Marta nodded cautiously, her instincts immediately on guard. "Yes." "Why?" she asked, her tone slightly defensive. "Oh, don't worry," the woman said, laughing softly, sensing Marta's unease. "It's just that my daughter seems to have made friends with him. Look." Marta followed the woman's gaze and saw Lucas laughing with a little girl around his age. They were racing each other down the slide, their faces lit up with pure, unfiltered joy. The sight made Marta's heart swell with a bittersweet mix of emotions. "Her name is Sophia," the woman continued. "She's usually a bit shy, but it seems your son has broken the ice." Marta felt herself relax just a little. Lucas usually has that effect on people. He's very sociable. "That's a wonderful quality," the woman said warmly. "By the way, I'm Elena." She offered her hand and Marta shook it, though her guard was still slightly up. "Marta," she replied. "Do you come here often?" "I don't remember seeing you before," Elena asked, trying to make conversation. Marta tensed up again. "No, we're visiting my mother," she said, her voice tightening with the discomfort of sharing even that small detail. Elena didn't seem to notice Marta's discomfort. "Oh, that's nice. It's important to keep those family ties," she said cheerfully. "We come here almost every day after school. Sophia loves this park." Marta nodded, unsure of what to say next. Part of her longed to engage in a normal conversation, to embrace this moment of normalcy and connection with another adult. But another part felt guilty, knowing that her life was anything but normal right now. She was acutely aware of the darkness that lingered just beneath the surface, threatening to pull her back into the harsh reality she was trying to momentarily escape. Mommy," Lucas's voice interrupted her thoughts. He came running over, with Sophia close behind him. "Can I play in the sandbox with Sophia? Please," he asked, his eyes wide with excitement. Marta looked at Elena, who smiled and nodded. "Sure, sweetheart," Marta said, her voice softening. "But stay where I can see you, okay?" "Yes," both children exclaimed in unison before dashing off to the sandbox, their laughter trailing behind them. "They're adorable, aren't they?" Elena commented, watching the two children with a smile. "At that age, making friends is so easy. I wish adults could keep that ability." Marta tried to smile back, but it felt forced. Her thoughts were too tangled in the complexities of her own life. Elena must have noticed Marta's strained expression because her tone shifted, becoming more gentle. "Is everything okay? You seem worried about something." Marta hesitated, caught between the desire to open up and the instinct to protect her privacy. She didn't know this woman, and she certainly didn't want to burden a stranger with her problems. But the weight of what she was carrying, the isolation she felt, made the idea of talking to anyone tempting. "It's complicated," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We're going through a tough time." Elena nodded with understanding. "I get it. We all have our struggles. If you ever need to talk." At that moment, Marta's phone rang, cutting off the conversation. It was her mother calling. "I'm sorry, I have to take this," Marta said, grateful for the interruption. "Don't worry," Elena said, standing up to give Marta some space. "I'll go watch the kids." Marta answered the phone as Elena walked away. "Mom, what's up?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Marta, sweetie, where are you? I came home and didn't find you." Her mother's voice came through, laced with worry. "We're at the park, Mom. We needed some fresh air," Marta replied, glancing over at Lucas and Sophia, who were now engrossed in building a sandcastle together. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" her mother asked cautiously. "Yes, Mom," Marta interrupted, her voice firmer than she intended. "Ernesto is in custody. He can't hurt us. Besides, Lucas needed this. We needed this." Her mother sighed, a sound filled with concern and resignation. I know. It's just that I'm worried. When will you be back?" Marta looked over at the sandbox, where Lucas and Sophia were laughing and working together, a rare moment of pure, innocent joy in their otherwise tumultuous lives. In a bit, Lucas made a new friend, and they're having fun. If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 5 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. "All right," her mother said, though the worry in her voice was still evident. "But be careful, okay? And don't talk to strangers." Marta couldn't help but chuckle softly at that. "Mom, I'm 35 years old. I think I can handle an afternoon in the park." I know. It's just habit, I suppose. I'll see you for dinner." After hanging up, Marta walked over to the sandbox. Lucas saw her coming and waved excitedly. "Look, Mommy, we're making a castle," he shouted, his face glowing with happiness. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Marta said, crouching down to get a better look at their creation. "And who will live in this castle?" "We will," Sophia exclaimed, her eyes bright with excitement. "He says he'll be the knight, and I'll be the warrior princess." Marta smiled, feeling the warmth spread through her chest. "That's a great idea. Warrior princesses are the best." "Aren't they?" Elena said, having walked over as well. "Sophia is obsessed with princesses who can save themselves." The two women shared a knowing smile, a brief moment of connection. "Lucas," Marta said after a few moments, "we'll have to leave soon. Grandma is waiting for us for dinner." Lucas's face fell, his excitement dimming. "But we haven't finished the castle." "We can come back another day," Marta suggested, surprising herself with the offer. "If Elena and Sophia don't mind, of course." Elena smiled broadly. "Of course not. We come almost every day after school. You're welcome to join us whenever you like." Lucas looked at Sophia. "Will you come back tomorrow?" he asked hopefully. Sophia nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, and I'll bring my warrior dolls to live in the castle." "Great," Lucas exclaimed, turning to his mother with pleading eyes. "Can we come tomorrow, Mommy, please?" Marta hesitated, torn between wanting to make her son happy and the harsh realities they still had to face. "We'll see, sweetheart," she finally said, trying to strike a balance. "It depends on what we have to do tomorrow." Lucas seemed a little disappointed but nodded in understanding. "Okay, but if we come, can I bring my fire truck for the castle?" "Of course, my love." As they gathered their things and said goodbye to Elena and Sophia, Marta was struck by how unexpectedly pleasant the afternoon had been. For a few hours, they had simply been a mother and her son enjoying a day at the park. No police, no lawyers, no terrible secrets looming over them. But as they walked back to Grandma's house, reality began to settle in once again. Tomorrow, they would have to confront the challenges they had temporarily set aside today. Still, as Marta looked down at Lucas, who was holding her hand and talking excitedly about the castle they would build next time, she felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they would find a way to navigate the road ahead one step at a time. Marta knelt to look into her son's eyes, her heart heavy with the weight of his question. "I promise, my love, that we'll do everything we can to have many more days like this. Things might be tough for a while, but no matter what happens, we'll always find moments to be happy together." "Okay." Lucas nodded, his small hand squeezing hers as a tentative smile formed on his lips. "Okay, Mommy." When they arrived at Grandma's house, the comforting smell of dinner greeted them, wafting through the air as soon as they opened the door. "We're home," Marta called out, her voice tinged with the lingering emotions of the day. Grandma emerged from the kitchen, drying her hands on a dishcloth, her expression a mixture of concern and relief. "Finally, you're here. I was starting to worry," she said, her eyes scanning Marta's face for any signs of trouble. "I'm sorry, Mom," Marta replied, giving a weary smile. "We lost track of time at the park." "Grandma, I made a new friend," Lucas exclaimed, rushing to his grandmother and wrapping his arms around her. "Her name is Sophia, and we built a sandcastle together." Grandma's face softened as she looked down at Lucas, then up at Marta, her eyes filled with a quiet understanding. "Really? That sounds wonderful, sweetheart. Tell me all about it while we set the table." "Yes," Lucas said eagerly, following her into the dining room with boundless energy. As Lucas helped his grandmother with the plates, his voice animated as he recounted his day at the park, Marta quietly slipped into the kitchen. She needed a moment alone, away from the chatter and the smiles, to process everything that had unfolded. She leaned against the counter, closing her eyes as she took a deep breath, trying to steady the storm of emotions swirling inside her. The relief of seeing Lucas happy was tempered by the gnawing anxiety of all that still lay ahead. "Are you okay?" her mother's voice asked softly, startling Marta from her thoughts. She hadn't heard her come into the kitchen. Marta opened her eyes, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Yes, it's just been an intense day," she replied, her voice betraying the exhaustion she felt. Her mother walked over and gently placed a hand on her shoulder, her touch warm and reassuring. "Do you want to talk about it?" she offered, her voice filled with the kind of understanding that only a mother could provide. Marta hesitated for a moment, the words trapped in her throat, but then they began to spill out, each one a release of the burden she had been carrying alone. She told her mother about the visit to the ice cream shop, the difficult conversation with Lucas, the encounter at the park with Elena and Sophia, and the message from Detective Lopez. Her mother listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally, her eyes full of empathy. When Marta finally finished, her mother wrapped her in a tight hug. "Oh, my dear," she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. "You're being so strong. I'm so proud of you." Marta allowed herself to relax into her mother's embrace, feeling for a moment like a child again, seeking comfort and reassurance. "Sometimes I don't feel strong at all," she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. "But you are," her mother insisted, pulling back to look her in the eyes. "You're handling all of this with grace and strength that amazes me. And Lucas is getting better because of you." Marta's eyes welled up with tears. "I'm scared, Mom," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I'm scared I'm not doing enough, that I'm making the wrong decisions." Her mother's gaze softened with understanding. "Marta, look at me," she said firmly but kindly. "You're doing everything you can in an impossible situation. No one has a manual for this. The important thing is that Lucas feels safe and loved, and you're making sure of that every day." Marta nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Thank you, Mom. I don't know what I'd do without you." Her mother smiled gently, wiping away the tear. "That's what I'm here for, sweetheart. Now let's go have dinner. Food always helps you think better." During dinner, Lucas continued to talk excitedly about his day at the park, his enthusiasm infectious. Marta and her mother exchanged looks of relief and gratitude, thankful to see him so animated and happy. "And tomorrow," Lucas said between bites, his face lighting up with excitement, "can we go back to the park?" Sophia said she'd bring her warrior dolls. Marta hesitated, her smile faltering slightly. "Sweetheart, tomorrow we have some important things to do. Remember." Lucas's expression fell as the memory of what tomorrow would bring came back to him. "Oh, do we have to see Dr. Ruiz again?" he asked quietly, his appetite suddenly gone. "Not exactly," Marta said, choosing her words carefully. "But we're going to talk to someone who will help us with the Ernesto problem." Lucas lowered his gaze to his plate, poking at his food with his fork. "I don't want to talk about Ernesto," he murmured, his voice tinged with sadness and fear. Marta felt her heart clench painfully. "I know, my love, but it's important. We have to make sure he can never hurt you again." "But you said he's in jail," Lucas protested, his voice rising slightly. "Why do we have to keep talking about him?" Grandma, sensing the tension, gently intervened. "Sometimes, sweetheart, when someone does something very bad, you have to talk about it a lot to make sure they get the punishment they deserve." Lucas frowned, trying to understand. "Like when I break a rule and have to sit in the thinking chair." Marta couldn't help but smile softly. "Something like that, but much more serious," she explained gently. "And then we can go back to the park?" Lucas asked, his voice hopeful but wary. Marta looked at her son, her heart aching with the desire to protect him from any more pain, but also knowing that they couldn't avoid what lay ahead. "We'll see, sweetheart," she said softly. "It depends on what we have to do tomorrow, but I promise we'll find time to go back to the park soon." Lucas nodded, accepting her answer with the resilience that only a child could have. "Okay," he said, his voice softening. "But if we go, can I bring my fire truck for the castle?" "Of course, my love," Marta replied, reaching over to ruffle his hair affectionately. As they finished dinner, Marta couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding about the days ahead. But she also knew that, no matter how difficult things became, she and Lucas would face them together. And somehow, they would find their way back to moments of happiness and peace, like the one they had shared today. Marta looked at her mother, who nodded encouragingly. "You know what? If everything goes well tomorrow, maybe we can stop by the park in the afternoon. But I can't promise anything," Marta said, trying to manage Lucas's expectations while giving him something to look forward to. Lucas's face brightened immediately. "Okay," he exclaimed, the excitement returning to his voice. After dinner, while Grandma took care of the dishes, Marta led Lucas upstairs to get ready for bed. As she helped him into his pajamas, she noticed that he was unusually quiet. The lively chatter and smiles from earlier in the day had faded, replaced by a thoughtful silence that made Marta worry. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" she asked gently, sitting on the edge of his bed. If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 6 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. Lucas hesitated for a moment, his little brow furrowing as he tried to find the right words. "Mommy, will we ever go back home?" he finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The question took Marta by surprise. She hadn't given much thought to their old house amid all the chaos, especially not after everything that had happened there. The memories associated with that place were too painful, too raw. "I don't know, my love," she replied honestly, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "Do you want to go back?" Lucas shook his head vigorously, his eyes wide with fear. "No, I don't like that house. It scares me." Marta felt a sharp pang of guilt twist in her chest. She should have realized sooner how Lucas felt about their old home. "Then we won't go back," she said firmly, her voice filled with resolve. "We'll find a new place to live, one where you feel safe and happy." "Can we live with Grandma?" Lucas asked, his voice filled with hope. Marta smiled, touched by the simplicity of his request. "We'll see, my love. For now, we'll stay here with Grandma. Is that okay?" Lucas nodded, looking relieved. Then, surprising Marta, he wrapped his arms around her in a tight hug. "I love you, Mommy," he murmured against her chest, his voice muffled but full of emotion. Marta felt the lump in her throat return as she hugged him back, her heart swelling with love for her brave little boy. "I love you too, my love. More than anything in the world," she whispered, kissing the top of his head. After tucking Lucas in and waiting until his breathing evened out, signaling he was asleep, Marta quietly made her way downstairs. She found her mother in the living room, sorting through some papers spread out on the coffee table. "What's all that?" Marta asked, sitting down next to her on the couch. Her mother sighed, looking up with a concerned expression. "Some legal documents I found. I think we should consider getting a restraining order against Ernesto, just to be safe." Marta nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle heavily on her shoulders again. "You're right. I'll talk to Detective Lopez about that tomorrow." "And we should think about getting a lawyer," her mother continued, her tone gentle but firm. "Someone who can represent you and Lucas during the trial." Trial, the word felt foreign in Marta's mouth, heavy with the reality she was still trying to grasp. She knew a trial would come, but saying it out loud made it all the more real and terrifying. "Yes, sweetheart," her mother said softly, taking Marta's hand. "There's going to be a trial. Ernesto will have to answer for what he did." Marta ran a hand over her face, suddenly feeling utterly exhausted. "I know. It's just. Part of me wishes all of this would just go away, that we could wake up tomorrow and none of this had ever happened." Her mother squeezed her hand, her voice filled with quiet strength. "I know, honey, but we both know that's not possible. We have to face this for Lucas's sake. He needs to know that what happened wasn't his fault, and that we're doing everything we can to protect him." "You're right," Marta said, straightening up, trying to steel herself for what lay ahead. "Do you know a good lawyer?" "Actually, yes," her mother replied, a hint of relief in her voice. "Do you remember Patricia, my friend from the book club? Her son is a lawyer who specializes in child abuse cases. We could talk to him." Marta nodded, grateful for the support. "That sounds good. Can you call her tomorrow?" Of course, her mother agreed. Then, after a brief pause, she added cautiously, "Marta, there's something else we need to consider." "What is it?" Marta asked, sensing another difficult conversation coming. "Your job," her mother said gently. "You've been out for several days now. What have you told them?" Marta felt a wave of panic starts to rise. With everything that had happened, she had barely thought about work. "I told them it was a family emergency. My boss gave me a few days off, but eventually you'll have to go back," her mother finished, her tone understanding yet pragmatic, "or make a more permanent decision." The thought of returning to work, with all the other burdens she was carrying, felt overwhelming. How could she possibly juggle it all? Lucas's care, the legal case, and her job? It seemed impossible. As if reading her thoughts, her mother squeezed her hand again, grounding her. "You don't have to decide everything tonight, sweetheart," her mother said softly. "We'll take things one day at a time, remember." Marta nodded, trying to quell the rising tide of anxiety. "One day at a time," she echoed, more to reassure herself than anything else. "Exactly," her mother said, giving her a reassuring smile. "And for tonight, I think you've done more than enough. How about we relax a bit? We could watch that series you like so much." Marta managed a weak smile, appreciating her mother's attempt to bring a bit of normalcy back into the evening. "That sounds good, Mom. Thank you." While her mother made some popcorn and turned on the TV, Marta allowed herself to sink into the couch, feeling the exhaustion seep into her bones. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and difficult decisions, but for tonight she let herself find comfort in the simple act of watching TV with her mother. It was a small reprieve, a moment to gather her strength for the battle still to come. She glanced towards the stairs, thinking of Lucas sleeping peacefully upstairs. One day at a time, she murmured to herself, her resolve solidifying. "We'll get through this one day at a time." As we wrap up, we'd love to hear from you. What have you learned so far from this video? Comment below with one thing you've learned and how you plan to apply it in your life. If you enjoyed this video, please leave your comment below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Your support means the world to us.